Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, October 25th, and we will hear Sustainable Urban Design, a Comprehensive Approach. For technical questions related to today, you can type those in the Q&A box located in your toolbar, and I will do my best to answer your technical questions. For questions related to the presentation, you can type those in that same Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Please don't raise your hand. Just type your questions, whatever they are, or comments in that Q&A box, please. Today's guest host is the Sustainability and Resilience series. We'll hear a little bit more about that coming up here in a moment from Carla, but thanks to the series for joining us and for bringing today's session. Coming up, we have a lot of webcasts coming up, and some of this stuff, the coming soons, actually, I already have filled in. We have an ethics session. We have a law session. We have an equity session. We have an S&R session. Did I say ethics? We have every single one of the required AICP CM credits available before the end of this year. So head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, and you can register for all of our upcoming sessions. Right? Today's session is worth 1.5 CM credits and one, excuse me, of the sustainability and resilience credits. You can log them by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our website. Again, it's at the bottom of your screen, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, and a reminder of what's on tap for the week. We record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over there and just type in Planning Webcast in the search bar. We'll pop up along with our well over 500 session recordings, all available to you for free. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so you get notified when one of our recordings has been posted. Again, if you have questions, either technical or for our panelists, just type those in the Q&A box. Keep those hands down. We'll get to those at the end during our Q&A period. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Carla, to kick things off for today.
Wonderful. And good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome to the Sustainability and Resilience series. I'm Carla Ebenbach, chair of the Sustainable Communities Division and of this series, as well as president of Ebenbach Consulting in South Florida. So I'm very happy to present today's session. The series is a multi-divisional effort created to provide opportunities for planning professionals to broaden and deepen your knowledge while allowing you to earn AICP Sustainability and Resilience credit, either live or on demand. And we're very thankful to Christine Dorsey and the Planners Webcast series for partnering to bring series to life. So I'd like you to check out these offerings that we have in the series. We have a collection of 19 recordings to date that have become a permanent library of resources available for free. And thanks to the dedicated efforts of fellow professionals who have donated their time and their expertise to make these presentations and to help us organize the events. These are available, as Christine may have said, on the YouTube playlist. Absolutely bursting the seams of this slide at this point. I think next event, I may have to actually somehow figure out how to make 2 slides. Just use that QR code to get right to the playlist, and maybe we'll also drop that link in the chat. Today's recording will be available soon on that same platform and also for AICP credit. And there will be more exciting sessions to come. Next slide. You are about to hear Sustainable Urban Design, a Comprehensive Approach. Urban design, as I'm sure you know because you're here, plays a vital role in promoting sustainable, resilient communities, or it can fail to do so in long-lasting ways. Sustainability on the urban design scale has gained interest over the past decades, and yet it remains a fragmented field lacking a unified approach. The wide range of scales, disciplines, and areas of expertise involved in sustainable urban design has made it difficult to fully understand and apply in real-world projects. Next slide, Christine. So today's speakers are ready to share some key expertise on this subject, and I will let them introduce themselves more fully, but we're going to hear from first Meryl St. Ledger, Senior Principal with Smith Group, based in Washington, D.C., and she's immediate past chair of the Sustainable Communities Division. And then a longer presentation by Nico Larco, Professor of Architecture and Urban Design at University of Oregon, co-director of the Sustainable Cities Institute, and creator of the Sustainable Urban Design Framework, about which you'll hear today. So thanks again for being here with hundreds of your fellow planning colleagues, and I'll turn it over now to Meryl to get us started.
All right, thank you, Carla. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Can everyone see my screen?
It's still coming in. There, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yes, as Carla said, my name is Meryl St. Ledger, and I lead the Urban Design and Planning Studio at Smith Group's DC office, and am Carla's predecessor, the immediate past chair of the Sustainable Communities Division here at APA. I have the pleasure of introducing today's topic and our speaker, Nico Larco, professor at the University of Oregon and the lead author of the Sustainable Urban Design Handbook. He's going to talk about the framework that he has created and published in this book. But before I introduce Nico, I wanted to set the stage a little bit and touch on why sustainable urban design matters right now. After all, as planners, we have a lot of policy guidance out there from APA and from other organizations. We have excellent published work and specific policies to guide our communities in addressing sustainability, climate change, and resiliency issues. We also have a number of organizations that have published goals and performance measures for reaching the needed sustainability and resiliency targets that we are after in the built environment. So we know what we want, but we're not always sure how to get there. And that's where urban design comes in. Urban design's impact can be truly transformative. How we plan and design our cities, our towns, and our spaces matters to our present and to our future. After all, 55% of people now live in urban areas, and our cities are responsible for 80% of the global GDP, but also 50% of the waste, 70% of the natural resources, and 90% of the innovation. And the innovation is key because that's how we can make changes that address these issues. At the same time, climate change, government policies, world events have created shocks and stresses on our people and our systems that are testing our resilience and pushing us to find strategies for adaptation and mitigation. Sustainable urban design lies at this intersection. Several disciplines coming in together concerned with design of the built environment and therefore affect people every single day in every aspect of their lives. But more than that, sustainable urban design can really bring together the beauty and complexity of people with the systems that underlie our communities in a very meaningful way. The Sustainable Urban Design Handbook brings together critical sustainability topics with design at every scale that we work in. It's an amazing resource that synthesizes research and examples and presents them in a way that is easily accessible and applicable by professionals. So without further ado, I'll introduce Nico Larco. He's a professor, urban designer, an architect, and he leads Element Urban Design, a design and consulting firm, and has been professor of architecture and urban design at the University of Oregon since 2004, where he's also the director of the Urbanism Next Center and co-director of the Sustainable Cities Institute. Since 2018, he has also been a strategic advisor and researcher at TNO, a Dutch national think tank. Professor Larco researches and teaches sustainable urban design, has developed the framework that you're going to hear about, and assists cities and projects on how to best apply these principles and approaches. His work around Urbanism Next is focused on how technology advances issues such as shared mobility, self-driving cars, e-commerce, and the sharing economy. Professor Larco has published in various academic and professional journals, was a Fulbright Scholar twice, and has testified on his research to Congress, and was also a speaker at TEDx College Park. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, and Nico, you can take it from here.
Thank you so much. Let me get the sharing to happen here. There. Can you all see my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, huge thank you to Christine and especially to Carla and Meryl for organizing this and the introductions. Very much appreciate it. Very excited to be here talking to all of you and sharing this work that's hopefully helpful to the work you're doing. As Meryl mentioned, Nico Larco, I'm a professor at the University of Oregon in architecture and urban design. Also direct the Urbanism Next Center and the Sustainable Cities Institute. And what I'm going to be talking about today has been more than a decade's worth of work of developing an approach to sustainability in urban design. This is meant to be well, since you can't answer directly, I'd just like you to think about how do you currently approach sustainable urban design in the projects that you've got in front of you as planners, as designers, as elected officials, as community stakeholders. What is it that you do when you start a project, when you want to really focus on sustainability in urban design? And the reason that I ask that is because it is a very difficult question, and I found this work really came out of a realization that there wasn't a really clear answer of what to do with that. If you ask the question is this place sustainable, or how do I make it sustainable? It's a really complicated question. There's lots of things to consider, lots of different topics. There's conflicts, there's a variety of conditions. These images that you see here, the top one is Shanghai, the middle one is in Arizona, and the bottom one is in Libreville in Gabon. And these are really different places. And so if you ask the question, is this place sustainable? You would have all sorts of different answers. They're very different in terms of climate, obviously, but also in terms of culture, in terms of politics, economically, what kinds of populations you have. So it's a complicated question that varies a whole lot. And it's really difficult to know exactly what it is we should be focusing on when we ask that question. As planners, designers, elected officials, as stakeholders, there's a whole range of different things that we think about as related to sustainability, everything from obviously the transportation networks and the energy use with that, stormwater networks, ecology, a whole range of different issues. And so trying to understand what we should focus on is a really big question, but then also understanding how we would be able to compare or evaluate places, both in terms of are they sustainable right now, or as many of you all are planners and designers, trying to think about alternatives that could be happening in this location. How do we compare these different ones and how they might perform in terms of sustainability? Thankfully, there's a fantastic amount of information out there on sustainability-related topics in all sorts of different disciplines. And one of the issues with when we talk about the built environment and urban design is that it touches a lot of very different disciplines, everything from obviously urban design itself, planning, land use issues, transportation issues, urban ecology, everything having to do with the way the water moves through urban areas. It turns out there's a lot of fantastic information out here when you start looking at this in terms of urban design. The problem is that most of it is siloed, and so that really brings up two big problems. One, that this information is not accessible to people outside of that discipline or outside of that area. And two, that each one of these areas is not considering how they, on the one hand, they might have huge opportunities of co-benefits with areas around them or near them or topics near them, or how there might be, negative impacts and best understanding how to mitigate those things. So what you see here is this is just a very small sample of some of the resources that we use to create the work that I'm going to be talking to you about. We've looked at over 1,000 sources from a range of different disciplines, and also tremendously helpfully have interviewed a number of different individuals working in these disciplines to better understand what is the most important part of what they're doing, of the topic they're looking at, that we should be thinking about as we take these approaches into sustainable urban design. There are rating systems out there that have played a really important role in kind of raising the visibility of sustainability, and I would say motivating some places to move forward with sustainability. There's LEED, this is cities and communities. There's also ND, sites, which is more of a landscape-focused rating system, and DGNB and BREEAM are used more in Europe than they are in the US, and they talk about a whole range of different issues, not only design issues, but also things as broad as good governance. While these are tremendously helpful, they are, as they present themselves to be, they are evaluation systems. They are ways of understanding if the thing you've created does the thing that you'd like for it to do. So they're very technical oftentimes, and they get very specific, and it's very hard to use these as design tools or as planners to use these as a way of engaging stakeholders, for instance. As I mentioned, they get very technical very, very quickly. And so the work that we've done is really trying to understand how we approach sustainable urban design early on in projects, how we think about, how we conceptualize about this. So from all that research that I was just talking about before, the more than 1,000 different resources, in doing a whole lot of discussion and thinking about this, we really narrowed this down to 5 main, what we call outcome goals, that are important to create sustainability at the urban design level. So the first one is energy use and greenhouse gas based on transportation and land use. And the basic idea here is, how do we get people out of cars and into bike-ped transit? My sense is that many of you have a lot of experience in this area. This seems to be the most common one when we think about sustainability, a really important one as well. The second one is about stormwater. So really thinking about how it is that water that falls from the sky doesn't become runoff, so it doesn't move horizontally. And when it does, how do we make sure that we mitigate it as much as possible? Ecology and habitat, we're talking about how we make sure we don't touch areas we shouldn't be touching, how we are creating opportunities for robust species health, and how we're creating microhabitats in certain areas, because we work at a scale large enough where we can really affect all those things. The next section, energy use and production, is really talking about energy in the non-transportation side, so not about transportation and land use. And some of the other people who've looked at sustainability in urban design confound the number 1 and number 4 here, but this is really a really different world. This is talking about things like the urban heat island effect. It's talking about how urban design creates the opportunity for sustainability in architecture. So thinking about things like solar exposure, orientation, wind exposure, wind access, those types of things. And also it's about the embodied energy that exists within the urban environment. So we think a lot about embodied energy in terms of architecture, but we can also think about whole city systems, whole metropolitan areas have a certain amount of embodied energy based on the number of people who are living there, right? And some are more efficient than others. And finally, with equity and health, we're talking about things like how affordable the area is, how it is that the built environment is affecting affordability, accessibility, physical activity, how much we're moving around, safety, and then also social mobility, the opportunity for us to get ourselves out of, improve our socioeconomic status, and how much the built environment is impacting those things. So if you take these 5 main outcome goals that we think are important for sustainability, you can then, what we've done is organize them by scales that we typically work at in urban design. So region and city, the whole metropolitan area, pretty straightforward. District and neighborhood, a lot of projects in urban design fit this area where you're doing a whole kind of area design, comprehensive plan, for instance, or things like that. And then block, street, and project parcel are similar scales, actually same scale. It's just that block and street is typically what we think of as the public sector or the public realm, and project parcel typically happens from the private sector. That's not always true. There's definitely examples where that doesn't happen, such as in campuses and stuff. But what this gives you is an organization of all the different scales and then all these different outcome goals. And what we've done then, based on all that research that I showed before, is organize this in terms of specific physical things that you can do in the city. These are physical urban design elements organized around these different dimensions. And Christine, if the link that I had sent before, if you could put that in the chat, that would be fantastic to give people access to. So you don't have to copy this down or try to memorize it or even try to read it. I'm sure it might be small on some of your screens, but there's a link that I think the first link off of the link that was just sent to you is you can download this framework. What this framework does then, as I mentioned, is it organizes around these outcome goals and these scales. So what it lets you do is to say, for instance, I'm interested in this, my community is interested in this outcome goal. Well, here's all the things that need to happen on the physical urban design scale, or physical urban design at all these different scales to make that thing happen. I often talk about this as a magic decoder ring that helps you translate. Oftentimes some of the groups that you might be working with as you're doing thinking about urban design might not have a background in design, and this helps them understand all the pieces that are necessary to make that goal happen. You can also use it as a design tool, thinking about, I've got a project at a specific scale. Here are all the different questions that I should be asking about this project. So you can understand where there might be co-benefits around these things, or where there might be synergies. Not necessarily that you're going to be able to address all these things. We all know that there's limitations in projects, but at least it gives you a kind of a list of topics that you should be thinking about and helping you prioritize those things. You can also use this as an evaluation tool to say, I've got a project at this scale. Well, these things really are only going to help with these outcome goals, depending on somewhat what's happening at these other scales. Oh, sorry. So you can think about how it is that what's happening in an existing project. So you can use this kind of as an evaluation tool to say, well, these are the things that were working well at these scales, and these are the things that maybe aren't working well, and these are partnerships we might need to develop to make these projects happen. So it really takes what is I'm sure we've all felt, a fairly complicated topic, sustainability in a neighborhood, in a development in our cities, and helps you break it down into pieces that I think are more understandable, digestible, and actionable. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these through this matrix to give you a sense of the types of things that are talked about here and how these things relate to each other. And then we'll talk a little bit a little more about what the opportunities are of using something like this and resources that we've developed. So as I mentioned earlier, the first one, the energy use and greenhouse gas for transportation and land use, is really trying to figure out what do we need in the built environment to get ourselves out of cars and into bike ped transit. And for this case, really because bike ped and transit is a much better, much more efficient use of energy. So at the largest scale, at the region and city scale, the first absolute rule is compact development. And this is actually, compact development is important for all the different topics that we're going to be talking about. Compact development limits our metropolitan footprint, limits sprawl, lets things be closer to each other, has a tendency to lead to increased density so that there's more opportunities for origins and destinations to be close to each other. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. Here on the lower right, you see the urban growth boundaries that exist around cities in Oregon, but there's lots of different ways to make sure that you get compact development, green belts, transfer of development rights, all sorts of things. We can also think about things at this scale, such as our transportation network, the overall network across the entire metropolitan region. So not necessarily how a stop is working, right, but what the opportunities are to get from one place to another. For the same kind of question we can ask for the bicycle network, how that works across the entire region. Is it possible to get from one area to another as an entire system? And then we can also think about things like the regional land use mix. Do we have all of our housing, for instance, in one area, and all of our commercial in a different area, and all of our industrial in a different area? Or are we having more of a mix of those types of things? At the district and neighborhood scale, there's a number of things that we can look at. On the one hand, simply a question of how are we doing in creating a robust pedestrian network? And a lot of this has to do with street network connectivity. So if we look at this example on the left, this is actually Portland, where I'm from. This is a 200 by 200 foot block, some of the smallest blocks in the United States. And on the right is a suburban area, which I actually don't remember where I took this image from. So a suburban area in the United States. But what you see here is these small and defined blocks let us very easily get from one part of the city to another part of the city in a fairly easy, straightforward, and straight line manner, right? And it's very clear how to get there, and it's also fairly direct. In a more suburban area with these, what I call loops and lollipops patterns, let's say I lived right here and I wanted to, oh, apologies. I lived right here and I wanted to go to this house over here. The straight line distance is not very far at all and absolutely walkable. But what happens is I actually need to go through the street network around here, out to here, potentially onto an arterial, back over, and then down, and then get to that thing. So that is doubling or tripling the length of the trip, which we all do what is obvious, which is we tell our kids to get in the car and we'll take them there. So the street connectivity and the way that impacts the travel distance has a big impact on what mode we're going to take. Other things at this scale are, for instance, the density of zoning and platting. So on the one hand, what is allowed to happen here? Obviously, the things on the left, this is a mixed use zoning. The thing on the right is single use zoning. So everything is further away. But then also our platting has a big impact on what is developed. On the left-hand side, we have larger lots, which allow for larger buildings, denser buildings, more mixed use within that. And on the right-hand side, the lot sizes limit the types of buildings that could happen on here, even if we were to change the zoning. So that's important to think about at the district scale. We also think at this scale, things like our parking requirements, so what amounts of parking we're asking for, and also things like the land use mix. So on the left-hand side, as I mentioned, this is mixed use, very much the 15-minute city idea that I can get to everything that I need in an easy 15-minute walk or bike. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have single-use zoning happening all in one, only allowing one type of thing. At the block and street scale, we're talking about things like complete streets, so multimodal street design, streets that not necessarily don't allow the car, but have the car fit within a bunch of different modes that all have a presence and ability to be there and feel comfortable. So this is an image from NACTO, and the Urban Street Design Guide is a fantastic resource for those of you who don't know about it. We actually worked with NACTO on some of this research earlier on in developing the book. And here you can see, large, like fantastic pedestrian areas, bike infrastructure that feels protected and safe, dedicated transit lanes, and then vehicles are also allowed in this, but they're not necessarily allowed to dominate. Also at this scale, you can think about things of parking, but not only the amount of parking you have, but how you actually design it. So at the block and street, we're really interested in what the design of the parking is. Questions like, what is the edge condition of the parking? Does it feel like a big gap in the urban fabric? Is the parking located in front of the building or behind the building? Is the parking located on a corner or within the block so that you start to feel like there's more continuous street front? What size are the curb cuts? Those types of questions. And then at the building scale, we really start to think about how it is the building is contributing to sustainability of the urban built environment. So the image on the left, you have a high density housing. That you see the tower that's there in the back, and then the building that you see in the foreground is part of that same project. And instead of having those units all accessed internally through a corridor, which is typically how we do this, each one of these units actually touches the ground and has an entrance and windows looking out to this direction, right? And that creates a fantastic, vibrant street front, even when there's no one specifically in coming in and out of the buildings, right? This is very much the Jane Jacobs eyes on the streets, or the perception of eyes on the street. And so think about how different that would feel if this was all the backs of buildings and there were no entrances that happening here. In terms of a commercial environment, you can think of a very similar thing. The amount of transparency that you have here, the number of windows and doors that you have, entrances that you have here, help create this lively environment. So you can think about the difference of if this was just a continuous solid brick wall with all the rest of the urban environment being the same, how much this would diminish the desire to come here, walk and bike and use other modes of transportation. So that gives you a sense across all these different scales how that works in energy use and greenhouse gas. I'm going to go a little faster through some of these other topics. But so for instance, in terms of water and stormwater, as I mentioned, there's two main things we want to do. On the one side, one hand, we want to minimize the amount of runoff that we have. On the other hand, we want to mitigate the runoff. This is a slide that shows these different kind of conditions. This is, natural ground cover where water can move in kind of natural way. And this is where you have a whole lot of impervious surface. So our urban areas look like this. In this natural condition, you have 25% of the water that falls from the sky goes deep infiltration, 25% shallow, and 10% is runoff. In this more urban condition, only 5% has deep infiltration. So think about what that does to restoring our aquifers. But then 55% is runoff. So more than 5 times the amount of water is runoff. And the problem with that is that runoff, typically the way that we've worked with it is it's hot. It picks up heat from the surfaces around it. We move it really quickly into pipes and as fast as we can into our rivers and lakes. And so it's picked up pollutants. It's warm. It's coming at a very fast speed, right? And what we want to try to do is do a much more sustainable approach, which is to cool water down, slow it down, filter it, and put it back into natural systems. So in terms of minimizing runoff, the first thing we want to do is just create less of it. So two ways of doing that, or a few ways of doing that. On the one hand, if this is a watershed that you see here, instead of having even amounts of development all over this watershed, you can take that same amount of development and put it all in one area in compact development. Well, what this does here is it leaves most of your watershed to be in a natural system, which is much better overall for how the water system works, whereas this creates problems everywhere. It creates those issues I was talking about: increased heat, pollutants, more impervious surface throughout the entire watershed. Other things you can do to minimize runoff is simply have less impervious surface. So this means narrower streets. Thinking about using pervious paving wherever you can. And then also at the block, street, and project parcel scale, thinking about how we use trees. So there's a number of studies that have shown that tree canopies can actually hold a tremendous amount of water. Up to 27% of the rain that falls from the sky can actually be held within the canopy structure and the bark structure. And so if we think about what types of trees we're using, you can actually limit the amount of water that ever touches the ground. So this is all to minimize runoff. We can also mitigate runoff substantially with the things we do in urban design. So for instance, I assume many of these things are familiar to you, but things like retention ponds and detention ponds, rain gardens, swales, these types of things all help to slow water down, move it, cool it off as it moves through these types of structures, have opportunities to filter, and then also find its way back into the ground. So instead of like piping this all into a system into a network that goes directly out into a river, for instance, this is reducing the amount that ever gets there, and then also slowing it down and cooling it off and filtering it as it goes. Trees also play an important, again, at the block, street, project parcel scale, trees play an important role in that they can provide evapotranspiration. So they're pulling water out of the roots, up into the leaves, and coming out of the canopy, evaporating back into the atmosphere. So letting the ground be able to take on more water. So here you can see at all these different scales how you're creating these robust stormwater network and green stormwater infrastructure that helps to mitigate stormwater. In terms of ecology and habitat, the main things you want to do, as I had mentioned before, is don't touch things you shouldn't touch, which we decide that, as urban designers and as planners, saying what areas are open to development and what aren't. Mitigate where we do touch them, so figuring out how we buffer with that, which I'll talk about in a moment, and how do we create microhabitats. In terms of where we are developing, right, oftentimes we don't think of urban areas as areas of robust ecological opportunity, but there's actually tons of opportunity for this, both in like our ordinary kind of street trees and plantings and things, but also in these ecological networks that we've developed. So this is an image that shows a robust ecological network that's coming through here, right? So thinking about how you create continuity so that species can move through this, have opportunities for finding each other for mating. So you get a much better gene pool through this. And it also mitigates if there's ever a problem in one place that species can actually move from one place to another. So at the region and city and district and neighborhood scale, we're talking about these robust ecological networks and these ecological corridors and patches. as we get more to the block and street scale with those issues, you can think about how it is that we actually cross some of the infrastructure with these networks and corridors. So these are some great examples. This is from Maine DOT. This is a modified culvert, which actually is designed for turtles to be able to pass through. You have these other types of culverts that are for larger animals. And then you have, this is more expensive, but really effective way of getting, for instance, over this large barrier, which is a freeway, creating a land bridge that lets species move from one side to another. So thinking about at the block and street scale, how you deal with your wildlife crossings so that you have continuous networks. These continuous networks can have all sorts of different shapes, right? So you can have your kind of core habitat and edge habitat. You can have stepping stone corridors. You can have landscape corridors, all sorts of opportunities for those things, depending on what you're trying to do. And you need to be working with ecologists to figure out exactly what's the best for your target species. But then at the block and street scale, we can really think about where we do have development, how we make sure that that is not creating a problem for neighboring habitat. So thinking about ecological area buffers and making sure that they are sufficiently large for whatever target species we've got. So this is a slide that shows target species on the left-hand side and the length, the size of the buffer that you should have. And that would change depending on, for instance, if you're downslope from a more aggressive use, or if there's a lot of water moving between these spaces or things like that. Another really important topic at the block and street scale is this idea of high vertical complexity. This came from interviewing and having fantastic conversations with urban ecologists who said, one of the best things that urban designers can do and planners can do is to create more complex, more robust vertical complexity. And what that means is, what we often do on the right-hand side is things like this, which is these carpets of lawn of a monoculture, a few lollipop trees that are also all the same species. And while that makes sense in areas where you might have, where you might be kicking a ball or throwing a frisbee or something, we do this a lot. And even at the edges of places where we might be kicking a ball, there's opportunities to be doing something different. What creates a robust habitat is the things that you see on the left-hand side. This is a rainforest here in the Pacific Northwest, but it really shows this idea of a range of different types of structures. So you have canopy trees, you have smaller trees, you have bushes, you have shrubs, you have sedges, you have ground cover, all creating this really complicated vertical structure that creates a range of different types of habitat that help the same species in different points of its life cycle, right? If it's mating, if it's nesting, if it's hunting, or different species. So it really creates a much more robust kind of moment. Well, we can't exactly recreate the Pacific Northwest rainforest everywhere, but there are many things that we can do to increase the vertical complexity. So this is an example of a parking lot that has its water, instead of going into a pipe, it goes into a swale. So a fantastic kind of move with that. And then instead of just lining that swale with grass, you really think about the vertical complexity here. So here you see some trees, some smaller trees, shrubs, bushes, these sedges, these grasses, which really create a fantastic vertical structure, vertical complexity here, which is really good, especially for insect species, which are, if you talk to ecologists, are one of the most important classes of species to be helping with. You can also create microhabitat. So this is an example of a park which has grasslands, wetlands, and oak savanna all in one place. This is a lot of different habitats that are happening in one place, but there's opportunities within urban areas to really focus on creating a viable habitat within the area. In terms of energy use and production, we're really trying to do a couple different things. One of them is and a lot of it depends on the climate, right? So here with the book that we've done, we've organized it into these 4 main categories: arid, tropical, temperate, and subarctic. Most of the United States, as you can see, is within the temperate, and then some in tropical and arid. And what we're trying to do here is think about things about how do we reduce the urban heat island effect? How do we maximize the sustainability potential of buildings based on orientation, block size, and such? And so, for instance, you can think about things like this, which is there's different housing or building typologies which perform better or worse depending on the climate. And so this helps us understand, depending on the climate we have, what kinds of typologies we might be hoping for sustainability, and that would then affect, for instance, what kind of density of zoning and of platting, what size of lots that we're going to have to make this work. So you can see here, row or bar buildings work really well. Courtyard buildings work really well in a lot of different climates. Towers don't necessarily work great, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do towers. It's just that we should think about the trade-offs of where we do towers and the benefits it might have climatically compared to the benefits that we might have, for instance, for transportation reasons. We can also think about things at the block and street scale about the color of surfaces, so the creating cool and green surfaces. So this is often thought of as the albedo effect. So darker colored elements end up taking on more heat, absorbing more heat. And so how can we green an area or use lighter colored materials? This is a really good example from Barcelona and one of the Ramblas that's over there. And then also with this topic with energy use and production, we can think about the embodied energy of a built environment, as I mentioned. So here you see 4 different densities of development, New York City on the right-hand side, Florida on the left, Florida suburb on the left. And you think about the amount of embodied energy, the amount of energy it took to produce, maintain, and then dispose of the concrete and elements that are used, materials that are used for the street, for sewage, for water delivery, for electrical lines, and how much of that public infrastructure you need per building, right? That is definitely has a cost to it, but it also has just an energy side of it as well. So the denser the development, the more of an opportunity we have to reduce the overall embodied energy of development. And then finally, in terms of equity and health, we can think of a number of different ways that the built environment really impacts the opportunities for equity and health. Affordability. So first of all, everything that we talked about in that first section on transportation and land use that we talked about for energy use, so getting people out of cars and in bike ped transit is fantastic for energy, but it's also fantastic for equity reasons. So it turns out that bikes, pedestrian access, and transit use are the most affordable and the most equitable ways of moving. So definitely helps with a ton with affordability. We can also think about that to help with affordability, the types of lots that we have, the size of lots that we have, the type of development that we're allowing, and also the mix of housing unit types that we have. There's been a number of studies that have showed that areas that have a larger mix of housing unit types actually reduce the cost of housing. Accessibility, as I mentioned, all the topics with transportation. In terms of physical activity, we can think about things on the first, again, related to transportation, what modes we're being, the built environment is pushing us towards, and are we actually using active travel? Are we moving our bodies as we actually move ourselves through the city? So thinking about bikes and peds, and then most transit trips start and end with walking and biking. We can also think about the other piece is movement that has to do with recreation. So what kind of open spaces are available to us? A lot of studies have shown that having one of the biggest determinants of will you do exercise today is there a spot near you for you to do that exercise? Is it really accessible and is it welcoming? And so thinking about where we put our open space, and then also the type of open space is what kinds of things. So this is in the block and street scale, thinking about active and attractive open space. Is it open? Does it include amenities for young children? Does it include amenities for teenagers and young adults, such as fields and courts and things like that? And does it include amenities for older adults, such as benches, places to sit and places to stroll? In terms of safety, we can think about how it is that we're organizing our different uses. Great to have mixed use, but we don't necessarily want to have, for instance, housing right next to a factory that could have pollutants, or putting schools, for instance, right next to a freeway. So thinking about how it is that we can minimize, based on a land use question, conflicts with that. We also think about transportation safety. So all the things that we talked about again under energy and greenhouse gas issues with transportation and land use also apply to this, to making safer streets. And then with social mobility, we can think about how it is that, for instance, the affordability of a place, the ease of getting to work, the ease of getting to healthcare, the ease of getting to job training affect our ability to improve our socioeconomic situation. So that was a lot of information to give you all at once. Apologies. But the idea is that hopefully what I'm showing you is how you can break this down into pieces that make sense and are understandable. As I mentioned before, the way that you can use this is if you have an outcome goal, you can think about all the different ways, the physical things, some of the things I just talked about that relate to that outcome goal. This is tremendously effective working with community stakeholders, which usually are very clear about the outcome they would like to have, but aren't really sure about how it is that you can create that in the built environment. As Meryl was talking about earlier, this question of how do we do it, right? We know what we want to get to. How do we do it? Well, this helps you understand that. As I mentioned before, also you can think about how it is that the topics the topics that exist at a specific scale. What are the questions we should be asking? So I've got a project that block and street or a district neighborhood. These are all the questions I need to be asking and figuring out how it is that they might apply to this. You can also use this to think about synergies or co-benefits. Understand the relationships between these, which I think is really huge amounts for huge room for improvement in how we do our work around this topic. So for instance, this is a topic an example I like to give. If we were thinking about street trees, and typically when we think about street trees in urban design and planning, we typically do whatever we did, in another part of the city. Yes, we'll copy that, or a city nearby, and typically with the same distance and the same type of tree. So, 20, 30 feet on center. And we can use this to actually make more informed and better decisions about that. So for instance, if we were thinking about trees and energy use and greenhouse gas based on transportation and land use, we might think about where we position the trees so that they actually act as buffers, viable buffers between fast-moving traffic and people. You can also think about what kind of canopy you would have so that you create this fantastic dappled light here in this example here in one of the Ramblas in Barcelona. In terms of stormwater, you could think about, well, what species do I have? What kind of canopy cover does it have? And what kind of bark structure does it have? And branch structure to think about how much it's going to hold water in the canopy or how much it'll evapotranspirate water and how much of that canopy is actually continuous in covering the street so that it can actually hold that water. In terms of ecology and habitat, you can think about, are we using all one species of trees or should we maybe be varying the trees along the street? Should we be having them regularly spaced, which there's a lot of reasons to do that, or should we start to maybe cluster them? Should we just have them come out of the ground as they're shown here, or are there opportunities for vertical complexity in this? So lots of questions that we could ask to help us design a more ecologically robust area. In terms of energy use and production, we can think about where exactly these trees are located in relationship to buildings. On the one hand, they are, helping with the color and reducing the heat island effect. They're creating shade, which helps with that. But do we place them on the south side of the building, on the east side, on the west side? How close to the building should they be? What kind of canopies, right? That can help us with that. And then finally, in terms of equity and health, all the topics that I talked about with energy use and greenhouse gas, the way these trees help with that are also helping with equity and health. But we can also ask things such as, what species of trees are we using? Can we make sure that we're not creating problems with allergens, for instance? So this is a way that we can think about, again, using this framework as to understand synergies and co-benefits. We can also use it to understand trade-offs. So for instance, this piece that I showed you before, if we were just thinking about stormwater, maybe you think like, oh, this would be fantastic, and this would be horrible. But well, for transportation and land use, this and equity issues, this works a whole lot better. So you can actually use this to at least make evident where the trade-offs are going to be, and think about how you might mitigate if you're creating kind of problems within this or conflicts. In terms of how to use this framework, there's a bunch of different ways to use this. On the one hand, as I've mentioned, it's just simply as a design tool. So, early on with your design teams, consultants, helps you focus on what questions you need to be asking and opportunities for synergies along that, and also understanding what the conflicts are. As I mentioned, you might not be able to address everything that is kind of covered in this, but at least you can ask the question and figure out where easy wins are and where you might need to put either money or political will to make happen. You can do an existing conditions evaluation and assessment, and also for alternatives to see what the potential of an area might be. So you've got a new project happening in an area. The first thing you can do is go through the framework, and just for each topic, each element that's in the framework, say, is this already working well? Is this something that we could get to work well? Or is this something that's going to be a real challenge to make happen? And that really just gives you an understanding of the landscape of, oh, these are the areas that we could make work. These are the areas that are going to be more challenging. It can help you think about what your priorities are and where you might have most effect. It can also help you understand what partnerships you might need to develop to actually get projects to work, and maybe projects outside of the partners outside of the scale that you're working at, or maybe different sources of funding, for instance. In terms of client and stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned before, it helps you understand, helps you define where the priorities are, and translate that into actual physical design elements that you need to have happen. And then also, you can think about your design team composition. I would say your project composition. So, for instance, we worked with Gale Associates, where we had a bunch of people in the firm actually go through and rate how well they understood each one of these topics in the framework. And you get a really easy, quick landscape of, oh, our office does really well on this, and maybe our next hire needs to be in this area, or we need to get training in this area. But for those of you who are planners and trying to think of whole project teams, think about what kind of consultants you have. What areas of this might a certain firm cover? And it could be they cover a bunch of different things. And where do you have gaps, and where might you need to bring in other consultants to round out the team? Give you an example of how you can use this as an evaluation tool. This is an area of the Lloyd District, which is in Portland. This is a fairly defunct mall that just was recently purchased by a new owner, and this whole district is really in need of redevelopment. This is a convention center and a stadium, a arena. This is where the Trailblazers play. And we were asked by the city and by the owner of the mall to think about what could happen in this. And so we did an evaluation looking at, well, what are the existing conditions of this area? What's working and what's not if we want to make this area more sustainable? If we ask the question, how do we make this sustainable? So we did an analysis looking at different topics and how much where things were working well, where things were kind of not great, and where things were really going to be challenges. And you can look at this in at different scales, and it helps you understand where there's opportunities and where there might be real challenges to this, and helps you understand like how you might approach this. So that's work that we developed over many years. Over the last 10 years, we've been developing this, which is the Sustainable Urban Design Handbook that was mentioned by both Carla and Meryl. It has been a long time coming. If I knew how long this would take, I probably wouldn't have taken it on, but thrilled that it's out in the world right now. But so the Sustainable Urban Design Handbook is organized around the framework, and each one of the elements in the framework is its own chapter. And I'm going to show you basically how the chapter is organized. Chapters, each one, as I mentioned, each element has a chapter, and the chapters have on the one hand, this page we call the dashboard, which describes what the topic is, for those of you who might not know what a robust ecological area buffer is, some of the metrics that are related to it, this area, which talks about how this element is influenced by other elements and how it influences other elements. So really trying to, and it gives you a sentence or two to help you describe why those things are related to each other. So it helps you understand how things are related to each other across all these different topics. A very rough implementation guide to say, if this is a greenfield development versus a retrofit development, how easy or hard is this in terms of cost, and how easy or hard is it in terms of difficulty? And that's like a little bit of a question of political will. Then each one of these elements also has a section which talks about the recommended approach. This is what we're pointing to. This is what we're trying to get to. This is the vision we're trying to get to. A typical approach, this is what we usually build, which is often not quite to the level that we'd like for it to be, but so that we can understand where the differences are. And then the importance, and this is where we have a lot of the peer-reviewed research and professional best practices that we've researched to say why you should be paying attention to this. What are the impacts that you're going to have from this? We have each element also has a section on background. So if you don't know what the difference is between a core and edge habitat, we explain it to you there. We explain, for instance, impacts between like such as buffer width, shape, and plantings, and how that can affect the buffer. And then we have a section on consideration caveats, which tells you talks about element interaction. This is really trying to bring nuance to your understanding of how this element works. Talks about element interactions, some political issues you'd probably need to keep in mind as you work on this topic. Maintenance and operation issues you might have to consider as you work on this topic, and then some other issues. And then finally, we get to the guidelines for urban design. And the idea here was to synthesize a whole lot of research that we've done to say, here's some basic rules of thumbs that you can follow to make sure that you make good decisions that you're not going to feel like you shot yourself in the foot with later on as you continue to develop a project. So for instance, the size of the buffers you might need, and then thinking about how those buffers might change depending on topography and landscape, and how you might use vegetation for it. So those types of things. So each element in the framework has its own chapter on this. A lot of people to thank in making this happen. Karin Knudsen, who's actually now the mayor-elect in the city of Eugene, is a co-author with me. And then a bunch of professors, professionals, and students who helped make this happen. So tremendous, standing on the shoulder of giants of not only from the literature we looked at, but really individuals who really helped us put this all together. So this is the book in case that's of interest. I hope it can be helpful to you all in the work that you're doing, and we found that it's both for design teams and planners, but also elected officials or community stakeholders. It really gives them a way of helping understand how it is that these topics that they're interested can work together and how it's translated into actual projects. Really briefly, I'll also mention, as was mentioned before, I run the Urbanism Next Center. Urbanism Next looks at the impacts of emerging technology on cities. And so we look at things like how new mobility or shared mobility, self-driving cars, e-commerce, how those things are impacting cities, and how those things have impacts on equity, health, the environment, and the economy. So I just mentioned that in case people are interested in those topics. Love to hear from you, we've got a lot of research we've done in that area. Online, urbanismnext.org, we have a section called The Nexus, which compiles a lot of research on these topics to help you understand that. So with that, I'll just say I'm hopeful that this is helpful. As I mentioned, we often many of us are really interested in figuring out how we can create more sustainable communities. It often feels overwhelming. There's just a ton of different topics. It's hard to understand how to relate them. It's hard to know what questions to ask. It's hard for community stakeholders to understand how to engage in this and know where their issues kind of fit into all of this. So the hope is that the Sustainable Urban Design Framework is a tool that can help you decipher that, simplify it, understand that there is actually it is actionable, that we can take a rational approach to it and chip away at this. And yeah, so with that, I'll happy to take any questions you might have. Thanks so much.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. And wait, the questions are coming in. First and foremost, let's kind of set the stage and ask a overarching question. And that's, of all the stuff that you've looked at, what's the most important out of all the things? What's the most important and why?
That is a great question. Thank you so much. So there's a ton of different topics in this, and we've touched a lot of things, and you realize how many of these things are interconnected. I'll say the thing that really rises to the top as the most important thing, if we could only really influence one thing, it would have to be density. And while density of development does not guarantee that any of these outcome goals are going to happen, not having density is an enormous, we'll say, thorn in the side of trying to get any of these things done. I often think a lot of the work I do work in the Netherlands, as was mentioned, with TNO, and so I get to spend a lot of time over there. And I often think, my goodness, so many of the things that, as planners, as urban designers, as designers, we think, oh my goodness, it'd be great if it worked there, is working in the Netherlands. And you realize that a lot of that is because they just have the underlying density that makes all of these things possible. And so I feel like in the United States, a lot of the times, and in North America and Canada as well, a lot of the times we're just trying to put Band-Aids on not enough density of development. So if there was one thing that I could, a mission to try to work on, I'd say creating more density just helps a ton with everything else. It makes many of these things possible.
Well, let's lean into density for a minute. And I love the Netherlands just as much as the next planner in terms of goals, right?
Uh-huh.
But let's be realistic that so much of our country is not, we just can't do the density. It's not meant to be dense, or communities aren't built to be dense, whatever that might look like, just from infrastructure alone or just the topography. Um, so what do you say about that? How do we need to kind of zero in on our areas that, like, identify our areas that we know could be more dense and address that through our zoning? Or, do we just need to, I'm just thinking of a rural community that is on well water and doesn't have any type of infrastructure, and there's absolutely no way that we can ask them to be denser than they are.
Sorry, I just got a phone call that interrupted my
Oh
my.
no.
So if you could repeat the last part of the question.
Oh, I don't even remember what it was now. I just
Okay.
started ranting.
All
Just
right.
that
All right.
I'm
So
just looking at how some communities, they are as dense as they're ever going to be, and it's not dense. It's just, it is
yes,
what it
yes.
is. And what do we
Okay.
need? So you heard that part. You heard the rest.
Yeah. So I've got two answers, two parts answers to your questions. On the one hand, um, this framework is not meant to be prescriptive, right? It's like one of the frustrating things to me as I was looking starting this research, 15 years ago, is that sometimes the idea of like uh, here's a what we should be doing for sustainability, and they showed you this like wonderful, dense, multimodal, mixed use, like fantastic project. And the truth is, most of us can't do those things, right? For political reasons, economic reasons, cultural reasons, whatever it might be. Um, and so what do you do there? And so the framework's really meant to say, well, here's a bunch of different topics that you can be doing. You can apply this to a single family home, like neighborhood. You could apply this to a dense neighborhood. You could apply it to a rural neighborhood. You might not be able to do all these things, right? In some places you can't, like just because of the way they're developed, you cannot do that. But how is it that you can push sustainability wherever it is you are, right? Really thinking about it's an incremental approach. So I think that's one piece. The other piece I'd say though is I do think we need to reconsider a little bit how we think about density. So rural areas, absolutely, right? Like we do not need to densify rural areas. But I think we do need to think about how it is that we can create as much density as possible in the areas that we do have developed. And that doesn't mean like creating like Hong Kong density everywhere. I mean, just so for instance, Oregon's recently eliminated single family use zoning as a thing, right? So now everywhere by right, you can do duplexes and some places triplexes and quadplexes. And this isn't like creating, massive density everywhere, but if everywhere had, a granny flat, an ADU behind a house, you've doubled the density of the area. So there's ways of creating more density that don't necessarily have to feel oppressive or, tremendously aggressive. So I would say that. So first, yes, more density is better. Two, well, let's find density where it can work and where it feels good, and it feels, works with the neighborhood that we're working in. And three, there's some places that density is not going to be possible. What are the other things that we can do to make this place more sustainable?
So I would say in a lot of communities, when we have these sessions on sustainability and resilience and climate change and all of this, there are always many questions about how do I convince my community that this is important? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is money talks. So, from your perspective, when, for example, we're talking about perhaps removing single family housing from our zoning ordinances to allow for more dense housing, can we say money talks to that? Like, is that something that that you can talk about
So
for a minute or two?
yeah. So yes. So this is a really good question, and it's complicated answers. So first of all, yes, money talks. Like in the U.S. and I'll say everywhere, but definitely in the U.S., economics seems to govern. Like we put that high on a pedestal of like things that we react to. Um, and so the question, part of that is, so for instance, there's fantastic work that's done by Urban 3, I think it's called, which looks at the cost of creating low density development it's expensive. Like the cost of the infrastructure and the cost of maintaining that infrastructure and providing services is really expensive. So there is an economic argument to be had there. But that's not necessarily always the best way to, in my mind, to attack this. I would say, this might sound a little vague, but figure out what the issues are with whoever it is that you're needing to convince. What is it that's motivating them? What are they trying to get to? And then figure out where that aligns with whatever it is that you're trying to do in terms of sustainability, and work on that. So I'll just give a rough example. We do a lot of work with sustainability with communities around Oregon, and Oregon has a reputation for being a very sustainable state, but it is mixed. There's some areas that are, die hard sustainability is super important, and other areas which not at all. And in some of the communities we work in, you can come in and talk about sustainability as the thing that you're trying to do. Or equity is the thing you're trying to do. In other areas, you need to talk about, well, we're really talking about quality of life issues, or we're really talking about efficiency issues, right? And so somewhat framing, I think, is important to understanding your audience. I don't think that's particular to the thing that I'm talking about here. And there was something else I was going to, oh, yeah. And there's also, I have been shocked at the number of times that I've talked to developers and about some kind of sustainability topic, and that they've been doing something that is really like not helpful. Connectivity is a really big one in that. And you ask them like, well, would you put a walking path that's connected here and here? And they said, sure, right? The answer is like, yeah, absolutely. As long as you told me early enough in the design process. I don't want that as a change order, but if you tell me early enough in the design process, there's opportunity. So part of like, I think there's one like low-hanging fruit of a lot of things that we could do if we just understand what the synergies are and what the relationships are. I'm putting in a new, bike lane. Is there opportunities to deal with stormwater when I do that? If I'm putting in a new stormwater system, is there a possibility to work on ecology and habitat when I do that? So I think there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit opportunities that because we've been so siloed and so separate, that we haven't really addressed the way that we could.
Next question. Thank you. On one of your slides, you had two street patterns. One on the left side, it was like a grid pattern, and then on the right side, it was like the loops and lollipops and plan development type thing. And if I'm understanding right, kind of the idea was that if you're in a grid pattern, it takes you less time to get through versus winding through developments or wherever, which then more drive time, more pollutants, all of that. So I'm curious. So how do we, when we receive a plan in front of us for a new development, and you see all these winding roads, a lot of it, I think, has to do with accounting for the natural features like waterways, trees, floodplains. I know also a lot of times roads tend to be curvy just to slow people down in residential areas. So is there a place to meet in the middle? Like, do you have examples or techniques to kind of not necessarily be a grid pattern so, that it can organically live within its environment, but also at the same time kind of cut down on some of that drive time?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a great resource Susan Handy wrote. It's an APA resource.
You can do this.
I think it's called like street connectivity. I think it's just called street connectivity. So Susan Handy, one of the APA, the resource books that you all put together, which are fantastic, has a ton of fantastic research on how to increase connectivity. And I'll just give you a couple of things to think about. One, just reducing the distance between intersections. So somehow like not allowing enormous large distances between intersections. So you do have, it doesn't have to be a grid, but bring in another street that happens there. It turns out curvy streets don't necessarily slow people down as much as intersections do. So having intersections actually is a better way to slow down traffic. Some other things that you run into sometimes, though, are people don't want cars going through there. And as far as I'm concerned, I can completely understand that. So where possible, streets, I think full streets are great. But if not, would you be willing to do a bike path or a pedestrian path through here, right, as ways of creating connectivity? The other thing that, and I've written a whole book on this on site design for multifamily housing. But if you think of multifamily housing, oftentimes it is not connecting, is actually a barrier to connectivity. These are large parcels of land that connect typically to the arterial and then have no connection to things around them. So just thinking about how you create moments of connection through streets ideally, but also just through pathways is a really good way of increasing connectivity overall.
Thank you. Could we talk a little bit about agriculture and whether it deserves some airtime in this urban design kind of discussion? If you could talk a little bit about that.
And are you thinking about urban agriculture, or are you thinking about
Both agriculture,
okay.
yes, like rural
Large scale, okay.
agriculture and urban agriculture.
Yes. So I'll say the large scale agriculture with a capital A, right? In other words, like the farming. Absolutely, like urban design has a ton to say about that, and mostly we should not impede in those things. So for those of you who are familiar with the history of Oregon, we have urban growth boundaries, which I think are pretty well understood everywhere, and we've got state planning. What's really interesting is the story of why that happened, which was a bizarre mix of bedfellows of environmentalists, people in the agriculture industry, and also let's say the natural resource industry, right? So logging and such, sorry, so those three, yeah. So logging, resource extraction, we'll say, agriculture, and environmentalists. And the thing that was really clear to all three groups is it works better when you all stay over there development wise, right? And keep in your cities and don't, sprawl out into all of our areas over here. And that's really the birth of the urban growth boundaries that exist in the state. So absolutely thinking about how we create cities that are denser, more vibrant, have, with compact development, that is an absolute boon to agricultural areas that are around our cities. And one of the slides I showed, you see, I didn't really talk about it, but this edge between development and agriculture that exists over here with that compact development. In terms of urban agriculture, there's tremendous opportunities for creating food production within cities. So community gardens are fantastic in terms of the actual food production, but also in terms of community development and community, developing a sense of community in these areas. So thinking about how we do that, where they're located, can we walk to them? How do they maybe tie into the stormwater network, right? Enormous opportunities for all of that. Yes.
I'm looking at your framework here, and I'm very quickly looking through it, and I'm not seeing anything related to like wind farming or solar farming, things like that. Does that play a role in this framework, or is that a different discussion?
So we talked about putting an area in there with this, and we decided not to include it. The other one that I think kind of relatedly, which is missing, is we had a chapter on district energy and an element on district energy, and we ended up not including it, mostly because they get really specific. They're a specific land use kind of question, and so you can kind of think that it's somewhat exists in some of the elements that are related to land use. Their location is not uh, uh, their location is not tremendously important in terms of adjacencies, right? And because you can move power fairly, not super easily, but definitely within an urban area, you can use it, you move it fairly easily. And so we weren't sure if we needed to have a specific element called out to that. But yeah, that is something, there's definitely gaps in in this work that we're continuing to develop. And actually, it's been great getting feedback from people as we think about the next iteration of this.
When we're talking about density, and I'm just thinking of communities that perhaps came late to zoning or quality land use regulations, and there's just a lot of landlocked properties that are undeveloped. Do you have thoughts on that? On how, in what way we could turn that into an opportunity?
So if I understand, you're talking about like leapfrog development kind of topics? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Well, so infill is tremendously important, right? So if we think about compact development and density, figuring out how we utilize these spaces that are automatically more connected and more accessible to other parts of the city than building on the edge. So yeah, wherever possible, I think doing infill development. We do have a section on infill development specifically, although that's more at the block and street scale. But definitely, wherever there's opportunities to do that. On the one hand, on the other hand, we can think of these potentially as ecological corridors or helping with the ecological or stormwater network. So thinking about where they're locating, where they're located, what kind of habitat they have, how they're connected to other areas, right? Again, habitat works best when it's in corridors and connected. And so using those things for that. So on the one hand, they could be opportunities for increased density. On the other hand, they can be opportunities for really developing more robust stormwater infrastructure or ecological networks.
Thank you. So we're a community and we're looking at this framework. And then we say to ourselves, where do we start? Is there some type of like audit that we should be doing for our community to determine like what's the low hanging fruit? What do we want, what's like out there in the 15-year horizon? Like how do we tie this back to our comprehensive plan and make sure that there's continuity across the board? Because this is really daunting, right? And we might say, oh, well, this looks like a good idea. Let's, look at bicycle networks. But do you even know? Do you even have a handle on your bicycle networks in your community? Where do we start to kind of assess?
That is a great question. And so as was mentioned by Meryl when she was first introducing me, I started a small consulting firm called Element Urban Design, and it's more or less is how do you start? How do you actually do work on this topic? And the first thing you need to do is just to do an assessment, to just say, and I'll say assessment in two ways. The easier way is to just say, well, here's our community or here's a neighborhood that we're about to work on. How's this working? Like, let's just start out with this for each one of these elements. This is working great, or this
So
is
we're doing
kind of
SWOT
working.
analysis. That's what
Yeah,
we're doing. We're
yeah,
basically doing
yeah,
a SWOT for these. We
exactly, for
like a
each
good
one of these.
SWOT, right? We
Yeah.
like good SWOTs.
But it really gives you a sense of like, oh, these are the things that are, goodness, like, in terms of like stormwater, in terms of like energy use and transportation and land use, these are the things that are working well, and these are the things that are really a problem, right? So it can help you understand where you've got where things are working well and where things are problems, and what things might be easiest to deal with, the low-hanging fruit with this, and what things might be harder. And so you can do that, as I mentioned, physically, like looking on the ground, and have someone come in and help you think through each one of these elements, and then you can at the same time think about, is there funding sources for these things? Might there be combined funding? Can I get like stormwater funding sources and bicycle infrastructure funding sources that come together to help solve this one problem, right? So that's one kind of approach. On the other side, you can look at, and this actually came out of I presented this to the planning department in New York City, planning and urban design department in New York City, and one of the things they said is, it would be really helpful is to go through these elements and think about what our regulations say about each one of these, right? So we have these elements in the framework, and then we have the design guides in the book, and just think about like, is this doable in my community? Do I have barriers to doing this? And then, from that, almost like, again, yes, working well, could be fixed. This would be really hard to fix. Those could be fixed, and high priority could be fixed. You can end up saying, all right, well, these are the regulations that we should be thinking about, that we should be addressing first, right? And kind of helps you prioritize and create an action plan to that. And we'd be happy to help anyone who's interested in doing that in their communities or working with stakeholders to understand this or specifically apply it on projects.
Let's talk for a moment about the environmental justice angle of things, of sustainability. And this particular question is, hold on, I have to find it because something moved all over. Here we go. In writing, did you think about the role of culture within the sustainable urban design conversation? There seems to be more and more research on designing for diversity, and I wonder if this has a role in informing more sustainable design. So I guess it's sort of a two-part question. One, looking at it from the angle of environmental justice, and then secondly, just designing for diversity in general.
Yes. Great question. It's kind of interesting. So, we were sometimes asked, what's changed? You started this book 10 years ago. What's changed? In a lot of areas, like there hasn't been, I would say, a ton of change in terms of like the fundamentals are still there, but there might be some like pieces on the edges that have been really interesting, or some innovations that have come about, professional best practices. In terms of the topics around site design for community safety and inclusion, that has actually changed a lot. So before, I'd say before 2020, a lot of that conversation was really around CPTEDs, crime prevention through environmental design, and how can we make areas safer. And I think there's fantastic work in that, but there's also that those same tools have been used as tools of exclusion. And so rethinking about how we think about that, I think is really important, and understanding that it's not only design, but it's also a process is really important in all of that. How we engage communities, how even design decisions are coming in partnership or from communities is really important. So that's one piece. Another piece I'll say, completely lacking, which we touch on in the book, but I think is generally lacking, is how physically what physical urban design decisions, how they impact this question of equity and inclusion. There's a ton of work on process with that, and it's been like fantastic in the last decade. I think there's been more and more ideas of process, but what physically should you do it's very little. And so actually that's like work that we're doing right now, research work that I'm doing right now, with Aaron Ishizaka in Methuen. And we're looking at, trying to better understand what those pieces are. Things like, for instance, really interesting, the size of lots and the size of parcels makes a huge difference for who has a foothold in being able to get into this, be an owner or a renter even in this community, for both housing and for commercial spaces, right? Things like when we design public space, how much of the public space feels accessible to anyone who's not spending money here, right? Which is a really big question. How do we make sure that people feel comfortable with that? Whose narratives are being represented in public space? So a lot of these topics that I think are just have not been explored. And right now we're doing, so there's some of that in the book, absolutely. And in the equity and health piece talks a lot about that. But there's a lot more work with that. And we're working on that right now. And we have put in a proposal to the American Planning Association. So hopefully we'll be presenting on this at the National Planning Conference on those topics.
Great. Do you have an opinion on utilizing more trending forms of zoning, moving away from the traditional Euclidean zoning to, for example, I would say the trending reform right now is more form-based zoning,
Mhm.
right? And I know I meant across the country, and I think a lot of it had to do with our housing crisis, but communities from coast to coast are just overhauling their ordinances to try to promote more housing. But in that, I feel like there's all of these undercurrents of discussion about how, changing the zoning is affecting other things. So do you have thoughts on, our traditional Euclidean zoning and whether or not that hinders the future, sustainably, and if something like form-based is really a better option for our friends that are in the midst or looking to do some zoning code work here?
Yes, I would say Euclidean zoning has been a huge problem for generally, right? So Euclidean zoning and single use zoning within Euclidean zoning has just been an enormous problem. You understand where it came from, right? And it is a easy, safe approach, right? We are going to separate uses so that we do not create nuisance, right? Makes a whole lot of sense. And there's a whole lot of, I would say, cultural and I'll say economic, right? There's certain models of development that have now grown up in Euclidean zoning, and you could point to and say, like, I can do that, and I know it'll be profitable, and I know what it'll look like and such. At the same time, that has created a lot of the problems that we have right now in terms of mixed use and definitely in terms of density of development. And so, yes, I think rethinking how we do our Euclidean zoning, I'm really proud of the work that's happening in Oregon right now, as I mentioned, where we don't have single family zoning as an option. So even if you have Euclidean zoning, it's definitely been used as a tool of not my backyard. And I do believe that there's, this is very much an urban designer's answers, but form-based codes do a lot of fantastic work especially when you look at areas that have historically changed uses and changed kind of character over the years, but have continued to have similar forms that they've developed and similar forms that we love. And so I think there's a lot of weight to be put in that. Yeah, absolutely. Meryl, I don't know, maybe this is a question that you can answer as well. I think you probably have good answers for this.
I've always thought, zoning has a place, but as you said, I think Euclidean zoning has been abused. I do think form-based codes have a place as well, but I don't think that they are the solution. They can be fairly restrictive. I think some kind of I don't know. We love our regulations, but there needs to be some flexibility, especially, to account for changes. We are constantly changing, and there isn't a perfect way to future-proof, but creating some kind of framework for flexibility in the built environment is really important, especially as it sort of starts to help us mitigate against constantly tearing stuff out and, rebuilding. Again, from a regulatory perspective, I'm not sure how you account for that and create that sort of framework, but I think building in flexibility is really the key to having a built environment that can work with changes in our lives and in climate and the markets, economies. Anyway.
Real quick, in our last minute, examples of model codes that do a really good job of being flexible, incorporating sustainable practices, or allowing for the future sustainable practices. Any good examples that you want to shoot out right now?
I might push that over to Meryl, I think, who's more versed in some of these codes than I am.
No, I'm more on the design side, so I'm not entirely sure. I know, Christine, if you or Carla have any that you have worked with in your communities.
Carla, if you're back there, do you have anything? There she is. This is what you do, girl.
Well, as it happens, I'm working on a point-based system for the city of Pompano Beach right now, resilient development standards, which mandates, certain elements of sustainable design in a development project, but provides options so that a particular development can choose those options which are the most optimal for their particular development, for the ultimate users, for the marketability of their project. And I've observed just personally through my work on that there are a number of examples around the country of such flexible zoning based standards that help to incentivize incorporating these features. So hopefully there will be more of those in the future around the country.
We have to wrap up. Thank you. Thank you, Nico and Meryl and Carla, for bringing this together, the Sustainability and Resilience series. Thank you for joining us, to all of our attendees. Don't forget, we're recording the session. We'll post it on the SNR playlist up on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast and our channel will pop up. Don't forget to register for upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. And don't forget to log your CM credits for today. You can get all of that information again on our website if you need it to log those credits, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll talk next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.